In the world there are over 7 billion people, and they speak 6,500 different languages, some more common than others. English is the most spoken language, and as a consequence, English is also the most common language of content available online. So, if a speaker of Hausa in Nigeria wants to read about the situation in Ukraine from the local newspapers, the content will be translated from Ukrainian to English first, and then from English to Hausa, one of the national languages of Nigeria. In each step there is a loss of accuracy. Now Meta wants to get rid of the middleman also in the translation business. The company has recently presented a solution that will translate directly from one language to another using what they call a global model, and applicable to any language. It will also improve the accuracy of the translation. For example, the issues that cause loss of accuracy in translating from one language to another can be corrected when the same translation is performed with other languages.
Even the most advanced AI models used for translations today were often trained in English. So a lot of services would translate something from a source language into English and then from English into the destination language, which adds some noise and imprecision to the translation. So we built an open source and AI model that can translate directly between 100 languages without having to go through English as an intermediate step. We're going to keep building technology that enables more people to access the internet in their language. And in the future, we hope to extend that to content and experiences in the metaverse too. This is going to be especially important when people begin teleporting across virtual worlds and experiencing things with people from different backgrounds. Now, we have the chance to improve the internet and set a new standard where we can all communicate with one another, no matter what language we speak or where we come from. And if we get this right, this is just one example of how AI can help bring people together on a global scale. So to do this, today we are announcing two new projects. The first is No Language Left Behind, a new translation system that can learn every language, even if there isn't a lot of text available to learn from. We are creating a single model that can translate hundreds of languages with state-of-the-art results in most of the language pairs, everything from Asturian to Luganda to Urdu. Now, 5 years ago, we could translate across a dozen languages. 3 years ago, we were up to 30 languages. And this year, we are now aiming for hundreds of languages. The second project is even more ambitious, a universal speech translator. The goal here is instantaneous speech-to-speech translation across all languages, even those that are mostly spoken. The ability to communicate with anyone in any language, that's a superpower that people have dreamed of forever. And AI is going to deliver that within our lifetimes. Fundamental problem. And that is, even while access to technology is expanding globally, still nearly half the world can't access the internet in their own language. Now, this is partially because most of the web is in just a handful of languages. For example, there are millions of people who speak Fula in West and Central Africa, but their language is almost non-existent online. This is also because even the most advanced AI models used for translations today were often trained in English. So a lot of services would translate something from a source language into English and then from English into the destination language, which adds some noise and imprecision to the translation. So we built an open source and AI model that can translate directly between 100 languages without having to go through English as an intermediate step. We're going to keep building technology that enables more people to access the internet in their language. And in the future, we hope to extend that to content and experiences in the metaverse too. This is going to be especially important when people begin teleporting across virtual worlds and experiencing things with people from different backgrounds. Now, we have the chance to improve the internet and set a new standard where we can all communicate with one another, no matter what language we speak or where we come from. And if we get this right, this is just one example of how AI can help bring people together on a global scale. So to do this, today we are announcing two new projects. The first is No Language Left Behind, a new translation system that can learn every language, even if there isn't a lot of text available to learn from. We are creating a single model that can translate hundreds of languages with state-of-the-art results in most of the language pairs, everything from Asturian to Luganda to Urdu. Now, 5 years ago, we could translate across a dozen languages. 3 years ago, we were up to 30 languages. And this year, we are now aiming for hundreds of languages. The second project is even more ambitious, a universal speech translator. The goal here is instantaneous speech-to-speech translation across all languages, even those that are mostly spoken. The ability to communicate with anyone in any language, that's a superpower that people have dreamed of forever. And AI is going to deliver that within our lifetimes.
Well, translation models today are neural network-based systems. They take an input, which can either be speech or text, and they convert it into a mathematical representation of that text or speech. And then a decoder neural network will read that representation and produce a translation. Now, the first step to creating more inclusive translations is to develop systems that can support multiple languages. Why is that a need, and how can we do it? Well, a lot of work in translation has been focused on being able to translate just one specific direction, like going from Chinese to English. This is what we call a bilingual translation. Each translation direction would need to have its own specialized model. So I need to do Chinese to English, French to English, and so on and so forth. This doesn't scale to cover more languages. If I had to create a separate model for every single language direction we ever wanted to translate, we'd very quickly be counting tens of thousands of models to create. Such an endeavor just doesn't sound very feasible. Instead, we've focused on creating multilingual translation systems. What's the difference? Well, you've probably seen a professional translator translating between one language and another. That's what we call bilingual translation. Multilingual translation is that one translator being able to translate any language to any other, rather than needing a bunch of different translators. These multilingual translations can take advantage of languages being related to each other to improve their performance. For example, Romance languages, as a group, they have a lot in common, and this similarity allows them to learn from each other when they're grouped together in a multilingual system. The main challenge, however, is how can you create one system that's just as good as so many different specialized systems? Just like my phone has limited storage for photos, well, models have limited capacity. So they might not be able to represent so many different languages. In our recent wins at 2 premier translation competitions, one for text and one for speech, we demonstrated that a multilingual system truly is better than bilingual systems. By increasing model size through things like mixture of experts, by producing more training data, and by scaling back translation, we demonstrated that multilingual translation is a really promising way forward. We have multilingual models that can support more languages, but now how can we push beyond English centrism? Many translation models today, when they translate from one language to another, are actually bottlenecked on training data going through English. For example, let's say I want to translate Chinese to French, something very relevant for myself. Many existing systems actually translate Chinese to English and then translate English to French. Much of this is for a practical reason. Training data through English is just very prevalent. But our recent work called M2M, it provides a true many-to-many direct translation capability. This cuts the English middleman, and it directly allows any language to be translated to any other. And this supports around 10,000 different language directions. This has a lot of important benefits. For example, it allows training data not through English to be effectively utilized. There's a lot of use cases around the world where this is just the case. Imagine, Spanish to Portuguese or Thai to Lao. Those are translation directions that people use every day, but don't really rely on going through English. Further, we demonstrated that this direct translation actually produces better quality because going in and out of English being bottlenecked, it produces what we call cascading error. So imagine, let's say I make a mistake in my Chinese to English step. Well, then my English to French step, it can't really ever recover from it, which means that the error actually propagates and amplifies. This degrades translation quality. Now, how can we really expand to support hundreds of languages? Existing systems train on parallel data, examples of input text and output translation, and they need these in extremely large quantities. Only by seeing many examples of translations do models learn how to produce them? And machine learning is very, very data intensive. But the frontier that we're facing is one of data scarcity. For hundreds of languages around the world, there just aren't millions of example translations sitting around, even more so for speech translation. There are only a few languages with sufficient translation data. And after these, the amount of translation training data drastically drops off. To combat this problem of data scarcity, we've been creating and open sourcing large-scale data sets for the research community. Some of this is what we call monolingual data, which means data in just one language. This is critical for things like large-scale self-supervised learning. For example, the dataset Vox Populi, it contains over 400,000 hours of speech data in 23 languages. Beyond this, we also focus on automatically creating parallel data. Let me explain this process. It works by first taking data on the web. It can be in both text and speech. This data is then encoded with a multilingual, multimodal representation we call LASER. Then we use large-scale multilingual similarity search to identify sentences that have similar representation in the LASER space, allowing us to automatically identify pairs of translations that can be used as training data. This means that we can automatically create examples of translation data without needing to have people hired to manually translate large data sets. This works for both text and speech. Our efforts in automatic dataset creation already support over 100 languages and have been open sourced in datasets like CC Matrix. Recently, we've extended this to create over 1,400 hours of speech data as well. I started this talk by talking about my own native language, Shanghainese. It's a primarily spoken language though. How do we include those as well? Most speech translation systems today use an intermediary, that of going through text. Instead of translating speech to speech, systems actually convert speech to text, then do the text-to-text translation step, and then do a text-to-speech step. These models are so-called cascade models, but they're extremely dependent on text, meaning that they can't scale to languages that are primarily spoken, like Shanghainese. Instead, we focused on developing direct speech-to-speech translation systems, and these could enable translations for primarily spoken languages. Being able to understand any content in any language, it could unlock new experiences for all of us. Imagine being able to read a book on release date, or a child being able to interact with their grandparents, even if their grandparents speak a different language, or taking any online class you want. This shouldn't be a privilege for those who happen to be born in a country where they speak English, but something that everyone should be able to do. We've been focusing on this mission and scaling it to high-quality translations for hundreds of languages, focusing on both written and spoken languages. This is even more critical as we build new technologies and new ways for people to communicate seamlessly in the metaverse and beyond.
What is the connection between advancement in translation software and wellness, the general topic of this channel? The technology developed by Meta that brings people together through technology is also applicable to health services. Here is how, in the words of Mark Zuckerberg.
We're clearly focused on building technology to help people feel closer in all kinds of new ways. Right? That's our DNA as a company. Most tech companies focus on building new ways for you to interact with technology. But we build new technology so you can interact with the people you care about. One great thing about fundamental research is that advances made to help us achieve our vision also have wide-ranging applications to enable completely new things in other areas as well. One example of this is Fast MRI. It's a project that uses our AI to cut the amount of data that an MRI scan requires by 4x. So if you've ever been in an MRI scanner, you know that reducing the time spent in the scanner by 75% is a really big deal, especially for kids who struggle to stay still for an hour. It's rare to get that magnitude of improvement by bringing an unrelated technology to an existing problem. It's kind of like if you invented a new kind of energy that was suddenly 75% more efficient and being able to use it to power all sorts of things. So I think that we're at a very exciting stage in this cycle, and that definitely motivates us to try to enable this kind of innovation as much as possible.